Hello again, everyone. Dr. Flux here, and welcome to Module 3 for General Psychology. We'll be exploring the fascinating ways that psychologists study the mind and behavior. In this module, we'll identify how thoughts and memory can help us sort through our world. But before we jump into today's topic, let's take a moment to reflect on Module 2. What is the primary purpose of operationalizing a conceptual variable in research? A, to convert it into numerical data. B, to translate it into a measurable and testable form. C, to eliminate the need for participant consent. Or D, to ensure it remains subjective and open to interpretation. The correct answer is B. Operationalization allows us to measure abstract concepts like stress or happiness, making them concrete and testable in a study. What does the term p-hacking refer to in psychological research? A, publishing no results in scientific journals. B, sharing raw data and materials for replication purposes. C, conducting experiments without ethical oversight. Or D, manipulating statistical analyses to achieve significant results. The correct answer is D. P-hacking occurs when researchers tweak analyses to produce statistically significant findings, which can lead to unreliable results. Now that we're warmed up, let's zoom out and think big for a second. Have you ever paused to ask yourself, what is a thought? It's one of those questions that seems simple but can leave you scratching your head. Is a thought an image in your mind? Does it involve words or language? Is it like a fleeting feeling or something more tangible than that? Take a moment. Try to describe what a thought feels like to you. It's a fascinating exercise. In this lecture, we're going to explore what cognition is and how it works. We'll discuss what metacognition is, how cognitive processes shift between controlled and automatic. We'll explore motivation in the context of cognition, how we access mental concepts and organize them into schema, and what heuristics are and how we use them to make quick decisions. We're going to be taking a journey into the inner workings of the mind. But before we go further, here's a question for you to ponder. Think about your day so far. How much of what you've done today has required active thought, and how much of it has felt automatic? With that reflection in mind, let's get started. Let's dive right into the heart of today's topic, cognition. Now, cognition is a big umbrella term in psychology, so let's start to break it down. Cognition refers to how the mind acquires, processes, stores, and retrieves information. It's how we build inner models to make sense of the world. Think about everything you've done today. Waking up, deciding what to eat, remembering this lecture was on your to-do list. Through a cognitive model, all of these tasks require mental processing. At its core, cognition is the how behind our thoughts. Let's do a quick attention check. Which of the following is not an example of cognition? A, recognizing a face. B, feeling sad after a loss. C, solving a math problem. Or D, recalling a childhood memory. If you said B, you're correct. Feeling sad is part of affect, not cognition. It's a feeling. Cognition deals with the processes that underlie recognition, memory, and problem solving. Now, a central part of cognition is how we process beliefs. A belief is a statement we hold to be true, like Netflix cancels every series just as it's getting good, or walking 10,000 steps a day is healthy. Beliefs aren't about feelings. They're about perceived facts. Another major piece of cognition is decision-making. This is the process of selecting one option from a set of possibilities. It sounds simple, but consider this. How many decisions do you think you make in a day? We make about 35,000 decisions in a single day. Most are tiny and automatic, but others, like deciding your career path or where to live, require a lot more effort. To save mental energy, we often use heuristics, or mental shortcuts. These simplify decisions, but can sometimes lead us astray. More on those later in this lecture, though. The final piece of today's definition is memory. Cognition includes how we store and retrieve information. Memory is a dynamic process. It's not like a video camera recording everything perfectly. Instead, it's reconstructive, piecing together fragments of experience. Now that we've defined cognition, let's take it up a notch. What if I told you there's a way to think about your thinking? This ability to monitor, assess, and adjust your thought processes is called metacognition. Metacognition is getting meta about thought. It's thinking about your own thought processes. It's like having a conversation with yourself about how your mind works. When you pause to double check if you locked the door or reflect on whether you really understood a concept, you're engaging in metacognition. This ability seems to be uniquely human, and it's what makes us such incredible learners and problem solvers. Let's break it down with an example. One of the simplest examples of metacognition is noticing changes within ourselves, like noticing when you may have stopped paying attention to this lecture. Double-checking things is another example, like returning to your apartment to check if you locked the door. You're reflecting on your thought process to avoid an error. Metacognition also includes reflecting on why we thought in a certain way, like reflecting on our choices. Metacognition allows us to refine our thinking, helping us to avoid mistakes and optimize our learning. Let's reflect. Think about a time when you double-checked something or changed your approach after reflecting on it. What prompted you to do that? How did it help? Take some time to think about it. Metacognition isn't just helpful, it's essential for learning. This connects to some of what we discussed in Module 1. Research shows that when we think about how we're learning, we learn better. This is why techniques like active recall and self-quizzing are so powerful. They make us aware of what we know and what we need to revisit. Have you ever reviewed a chapter and thought, "I've got this," only to forget it during a test? That's because of a common metacognitive error. We often overestimate our understanding right after studying. Taking time to pause and test ourselves helps us to avoid this. Metacognition isn't something we're born with. It develops as we grow. For example, young children often don't rehearse information unless explicitly taught. Even when taught, they may forget to apply the strategy. Adults, on the other hand, are more likely to engage in deliberate reflection. By consciously practicing metacognition, we can improve not only our learning, but also our problem-solving abilities and decision-making. Let's do another attention check. What's an example of metacognition? A. Reacting to an emotional event. B. Double-checking an answer. C. Automatically recognizing a face. Or D. All of the above. The correct answer here is B. Double-checking an answer. So far we've explored what thinking is and how metacognition helps us reflect on it. But let's take a closer look at how different types of thinking work. Specifically, the contrast between automatic and controlled processing. To get us started, imagine this. The first time you rode a bike, it was awkward, maybe even frustrating. But now, if you've been riding for years, it probably feels like second nature. That's the shift from controlled to automatic processing in action. Controlled processing is the effortful kind of thinking. It's deliberate, slow, and requires attention. Imagine trying to learn a new skill, like playing an instrument or driving a car. These tasks demand focus because your brain hasn't yet automated the steps. While we are developing new skills, interruptions are even more impactful because they can take away from that effortful process of learning. Controlled tasks don't play well with distractions. They need your full cognitive bandwidth. Now let's shift to automatic processing. Once you practice a skill enough, it becomes automatic, like tying your shoes or navigating a familiar university campus. Automatic processing happens quickly, without much effort or conscious thought. It allows us to do two things at once, but only when one task is automatic. For instance, you can have a conversation while walking because walking no longer requires conscious effort. This transition from controlled to automatic processing is what psychologists call automatization. It happens through repetition and practice. Think about learning a second language. At first, forming sentences is painstaking, but with practice, phrases start to flow effortlessly. Of course, there's a downside. Once something becomes automatic, it can become hard to undo. Have you ever tried to unlearn a bad habit or correct your driving habits after years of doing it a certain way? That's your brain resisting change. Let's try a quick exercise to experience the difference. First, I want you to read the words on these 2 lines out aloud to yourself. Next, I want you to read the words again. Remember, this time, just read the words that are displayed. Finally, this time I want you to say the color of each word, but not the word. This got harder each time, didn't it? The last activity was a classic demonstration of the Stroop effect. Your brain's automatic instinct to read the word interferes with the controlled task of naming the font color. It's a tug of war between automatic and controlled processes. Here's where things get interesting. Humans have a limited capacity for controlled processing. The more complex a task, the higher the cognitive load or mental effort required. When cognitive load is too high, performance suffers. Let's bust a common myth: multitasking. You might think you're great at juggling tasks, but what's really happening, particularly when the tasks involve controlled processes, is rapid task switching. Each switch comes at a cognitive cost, leading to errors and slower performance. This is why something like texting while driving is so dangerous. Both of those tasks tend to involve a significant amount of controlled processing. When you switch between them, you're increasing your cognitive load and impairing your performance on both, which is incredibly dangerous when you're driving a car. Motivation acts like a compass for our brains, pointing us toward what we care about most. It's why you might pick out your name across a crowded room or tune into a conversation about your favorite hobby. Here's a quick story. In my early 20s, I was a club kid and nightlife performer in New York City. Now, club environments can get incredibly noisy. Music's usually loud, people are talking all around you. It can be pretty disorienting. But whenever I heard, "And please welcome to the stage Dr. Flux," I could pick up on it immediately. This is an example of something called the cocktail party effect. When we hear our names, we can usually pick them out of even an incredibly noisy and disruptive sensory environment. It's not magic. It's motivation focusing your cognitive resources. Our own personal motivations can also impact the way that we interpret our world or the instructions of others. For example, in my teaching, I really love making videos. I spent a lot of time online, and I tend to pull examples and metaphors from those experiences. I'm more motivated by visual information, so I tend to organize my teaching instructions around that. This is a different approach from another instructor who may be more familiar with teaching in a classroom. We take different approaches to teaching based on what motivates us to learn. Have you ever noticed how some ideas come to mind effortlessly while others take a little digging? That's the power of accessibility, how easily we retrieve information from memory, and it's deeply connected to how we organize our thoughts using schemas. Today, we're going to explore how these mental frameworks shape our understanding of the world. To start, let's try a little thought experiment. Let's play a quick game of categories. Take a moment and think of the following. Number 1, a band that starts with the letter C. Number 2, a food that starts with the letter C. And 3, a U.S. state that starts with the letter C. Now, I'm not really interested in the first 2 questions. I'm mainly curious about what state you were thinking of. There's actually 3 possible answers. How many of you thought of Colorado? If you're in my CU Boulder class in Colorado and watching this video, chances are it popped into your head first. But what about Connecticut or California? Why didn't they come to mind as quickly? All 3 are acceptable answers. Why were you biased? Here's a helpful metaphor. Think of your memory like a fish tank. The ideas you've recently thought about, or the ones most relevant to your environment, tend to float near the top, like brightly colored fish. Meanwhile, less familiar or less frequently accessed ideas sink to the bottom, harder to see unless you go searching for them. For those of us in Colorado, the idea of our home state is right at the surface, easily accessible. Connecticut, on the other hand, might be floating down near the gravel. This is accessibility in action. How readily information comes to mind based on factors like familiarity, recency, and personal relevance. Accessibility gets even more interesting when we consider how our minds organize information. Enter schemas, our mental concept organizational system. To continue our fish tank metaphor, schemas are like schools of fish swimming together. If I showed you the concepts, can fly, feathers, builds nests, and migrate, what would you think of? Probably a bird. Let's say you encounter a new bird species. Even if you've never seen it before, your bird schema probably helps you infer that it likely can fly and build a nest. Schemas don't just store information, they help us make predictions and fill in gaps. But sometimes our schemas can lead us astray. For example, what about this bird here? Penguins are birds, and they do have feathers and make nests, but they don't fly, and they don't really migrate. Sometimes our schemas don't always encompass everything. In fact, sometimes our schemas are just plain wrong. We often refer to these kinds of schemas as stereotypes, and they can often bias our behavior in damaging ways. Overall, schemas exist to help us make quicker decisions. They link together concepts more automatically, so we can have important information available to us at our fingertips. This falls into the realm of heuristics, the broad domain of decision-making shortcuts that result from all of these associations are known as heuristics. But just as with stereotypes, they can sometimes lead us astray. To show you what I mean, let's start with a question. Get ready to think fast. Do you think more people are injured each year by shark attacks or by falling coconuts? Go with your gut. If you guessed shark attacks, you're not alone. But the answer is actually falling coconuts. Surprising, right? Most of us are far more familiar with hearing about shark attacks in the news or movies. When does a falling coconut ever make headlines? This is an example of the availability heuristic. Our brains judge the likelihood of events based on how easily we can recall examples. Shark attacks stick out in our memories because they're dramatic and often heavily covered by the media, even though they're much rarer than coconut injuries. Okay, here's another one. Imagine a person named Brian. He loves the beach, he's very tan, he's easygoing, and he's attending a state college in New York. Where do you think Brian is from? Were you thinking California? Many people might say California because Brian fits the stereotype of a Californian beach lover. But statistically, over 92% of students attending state colleges in New York are residents of New York. This is the representative heuristic at work. We rely on surface-level characteristics to make judgments, even when the data points us in a different direction. Let's try one more. I want you to do a little mental exercise. If your phone number ends in an even number, think about how many computers you've owned in your lifetime. If your phone number ends in an odd number, think about how many pencils you've owned in your life. Now answer this. How many countries are in the European Union? The answer is 27. But here's the fascinating part. If you were thinking about computers, you might have guessed a lower number. If you were thinking about pencils, you might have guessed higher. This is an example of the anchoring and adjustment heuristic. Your initial thought, the anchor, influences your estimate even when it's completely unrelated to the question. So why do we rely on these mental shortcuts? Heuristics save us time and mental effort, especially when motivation or familiarity is low. If we're not deeply invested in a decision, we're more likely to judge based on superficial cues. Heuristics also come into play when cognitive load is high. When we're mentally stretched, say studying for an exam while scrolling through Instagram on your phone, heuristics help us make decisions with less effort. These shortcuts are incredibly useful, but they're not always reliable. They can lead to biases, errors, and decisions we might later regret. Think about a recent decision that you made quickly. Maybe what to eat, what to wear, or even who to trust. Was a heuristic at play? Did you rely on what felt familiar, representative, or something tied to an unrelated anchor? Identifying when we use heuristics is the first step to making better and more intentional decisions. Today, we've taken a deep dive into the mental processes that guide our understanding of the world. Let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned. Cognition is the mental engine behind acquiring, processing, storing, and retrieving information. Metacognition is how reflecting on our thought processes can enhance learning and prevent errors. Automatic versus controlled processing helps us to understand how practice allows us to turn effortful tasks into effortless habits. The balancing act of mental effort and focus under different conditions falls into the domain of motivation and cognitive load. Schemas are mental frameworks that help us organize information, but can also lead to biases and shift the accessibility of different concepts in our mind. Finally, heuristics are mental shortcuts that save time, but also sometimes lead us astray. Throughout today's lecture, you may have noticed a theme. Much of what we've discussed, schemas, heuristics, even metacognition, are models that our minds use to navigate the world. Sticking with our theme from the first lecture, all models are wrong, but some are useful, this applies to the mental models we rely on every day. They're not perfect, and they don't capture every nuance of reality, but they're invaluable for simplifying complexity and helping us make sense of our experiences. Our task isn't to abandon these models, but to recognize their limitations and improve how we use them. Before we wrap up, let's test our knowledge with 2 review questions. All schemas reflect real associations in objective reality. Is this true or false? The correct answer is false. Schemas can also reflect stereotypes and biases. Just because concepts are linked doesn't mean they're accurate reflections of what happens outside of our minds. Why are heuristics sometimes unreliable? A. They rely on logical reasoning. B. They oversimplify complex decisions. C. They require too much mental effort. Or D. They eliminate bias from decision making. The answer is B. Heuristics are mental shortcuts, and while they save effort, they can lead to oversimplification and errors. As we wrap up, remember, the way we think shapes how we see the world, and the models we use guide those perceptions. The models may not be perfect, but there are starting points, tools we can refine to navigate life more thoughtfully. As always, remember to stay curious, stay resilient, and above all, live life in flux. Flux out. I'll see you in the next lecture.